Hey everyone, it's Tim from Linessa Farm Specialty and Heirloom Livestock. I hope everyone is doing well. It's been kind of a weird week. We've had lots of interesting things come up. As always, you guys know if you have questions while we're on here, please feel free to just jump right on and talk. I was going to have a guest on tonight, but we didn't quite finish things last week. I had a list. I had 4 pages of stuff I wanted to go over, and so I think we're going to wrap that up and jump into our interviews again next week. So, weird day here today. For those of you that have been raising animals for a while, you know that, as my veterinarian friend, Dr. Rumsey, would say, if you're going to have livestock, you're going to have dead stock. I'm not a fan of that saying, so to speak, but it is true. The really great thing about having livestock is, the great experience that you get from it, the experience that you have, the experience that your children can have and others can have. I think it's really good for kids. I think people underestimate how good this is for kids. Using science, using mathematics, my children learned how to draw up dosages, how to do the math. My kids learned how to deliver babies. They learned all kinds of things. So it's been a very, very good experience. They learned a lot of responsibility, general safety, management, all kinds of things. So I could go on and on about how good this is. When we talk about how good this is just for general overall health and well-being, there's a reason I think that we see a lot of people that are suffering from depression and having other issues that get animals and get into animals. For one thing, you can't not go out and check on your animals. I mean, they're like part of your family. You have to go out, you have to check on them every day. They're relying on you to feed them and water them and check on them for their overall health. And so for a lot of people, it gives them a reason to get up and get going in the day. And it makes them feel good about themselves because they're taking care of something that relies on them, and it's right there and it's kind of in your face and you can see it. So I think it has a lot of benefits. And sheep and goats is a great way to get into livestock. It can be less expensive than some other animals. They're easier to transport. They take less room. They have a smaller footprint overall. But for those of you that have been raising sheep and goats, you do know that they can be a little bit harder to raise. For people that have been raising animals for a number of years, that have experienced raising hogs and cattle and sheep and goats and camelids and all these other animals and fowl like birds and turkeys and guineas and things like that, sheep and goats are probably one of the hardest animals to raise that I've personally experienced. And I think part of that reason is because it seems like sheep and goats can just get away from you quick, and they don't respond as fast as some other animals do. We have cattle, and it just seems like the cattle are just healthier overall. And it seems like, boy, if you get a sheep or a goat that gets away from you, they get away from you pretty quick. And we've talked about this a lot in the past about why it's important to walk your pastures every day, get to know your animals, on a more personal level, I guess is the best way to put it, because the benefit of doing that is you're going to know if a sheep or a goat gets sick. You're going to know, you're just going to look at them and say, you know what, you're not acting right. You're off a little. And anytime I would highly encourage you, if you start to get an animal that's just not acting quite like themselves, even if they're still going kind of through the motions, give them a health check them over. And I wanted to bring this up tonight, and I'll bring it up now while I'm thinking of it. That thermometer is a very, very important tool for you to use. You can tell a lot by taking the temperature of these animals and determining if they have an infection or if they don't. So, I don't think enough people use thermometer as a tool, but I do think it is very important. So, James had a question right off the bat. So let's get in. How do you introduce calves with your sheep at what age coming and going? So I think the younger you introduce the calves to the sheep and the goats, the better. We like to introduce our calves to our sheep and our goats about the time that they get to the size of the sheep and the goats. So babies, every once in a while we'll bring in a neutered or a castrated male and we'll bring him in and as a baby, and he does fine. I will tell you, we have seen issues with bulls getting aggressive, and so you have to be cautious with that. It seems like the males, when females go into estrus of different breeds, they still respond. And for those of you that raise sheep and goats together, or cattle and sheep and goats together, you may notice this, that when you have those boys, and those boys have really good demeanors and they act fine and everything goes fine. But then all of a sudden, when the females go into estrus, they just turn into little jerks. And that's okay, because that's normal and that's what we expect. But you should understand that when your female sheep go into estrus, you can get poor behavior out of your bulls and out of your bucks as well. So, try to wrap your head around that just because maybe their species isn't in estrus or in heat, it doesn't mean that they're not going to have some kind of a hormonal response to it. So I think that's important. Number one time of the year that we see animals get injured is during breeding season. Unfortunately, we had it happen today, and so that was kind of what I was alluding to earlier. We had a ram today that I had to put down. We had a pretty large size flock of sheep that we had two rams working. One ram decided he didn't like the other ram and caught him just right in the shoulder and basically just shattered his shoulder. I brought him up. I did a basic health check on him. I checked him out. And I made sure that it wasn't a dislocation, made sure that there wasn't anything that I could correct. And there was not. And I ended up having to put him down. And it is just awful that when you have to do that. And there really isn't much else I can say about that. I can't say like, oh, you get used to it. No, you don't ever really get used to it. It always, and it's not even the money aspect of it. You might think, well, that's a lot of money gone. And it is. But at the same time, you just feel bad. And that's okay. Anything that you're going to do that you really, really enjoy, you're going to have your high highs and your low lows. If you're doing something and it's just kind of like, meh, everything's just kind of mediocre, you're probably not really enjoying it. So it is what it is. We move on, we learn from it. It's unfortunate. But it is what it is. So anytime you're introducing new animals to each other, kind of get back to James's statement here, you want to do it slowly, and you want to kind of give them a chance to kind of check each other. And so what we like to use is we like to use two paddocks. We like to get these animals used to seeing each other, smelling each other, just kind of getting used to laying eyes on each other. First, we see how they respond. And usually you can pick up if there's going to be a little bit of aggression. And then you just introduce them to each other and you sit back and you watch and you see what happens. And historically, we've had really good luck with our cattle. Our cattle get along really, really well with our sheep and our goats, and we don't have too much trouble. So great question. We have some mini cows now. We have a baby, miniature Hereford, and we have our little panda cow, which is a cross between a Belted Galloway and a mini Hereford. And they're by themselves now. We haven't quite introduced them to the rest of the flock/herd yet, but we will soon. So good question. Let's see what else we got here. So it's so nice to see, we have a small group of you that come back every week. Actually, a lot of people watch this during their workday. The funny thing about YouTube is I can see when you guys watch our videos. Not you guys, not you. You would never watch our videos at work. I know that, but some people watch our videos when they're at work during the day, and that's okay. So some of us are here on our live stream nights, and other people like to watch it at work the next day. That's okay. But it is nice to see familiar faces here, and it's really great to see how many of you have evolved. I've talked to a lot of you on the phone. I've emailed with a lot of you, and I may see it more than you do. But after talking to some of you over the years, I can tell a difference when we talk about, like, you feel more confident, the knowledge that you have. And a lot of this is just doing it, right? You get information from someone, you go out there, you do it, and you see what works for you and you see what doesn't work. And then you implement it and you go from there. But Probably the best part of doing this is, my interaction with you guys and talking with you and seeing how things are going at your location. And it's tough times right now, with the cost of everything going up. And wintertime is just a tough time anyways. Thank goodness we have babies during the wintertime, or it would just be totally intolerable. So let's see what we've got here from our friends at Spear Family Farm. That's why I started. Makes you get up in the morning and get going. Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of sheep and goat farmers that do this until they're very old. One of the farmers that I worked for when I was a kid, he kept his sheep until he was probably close to 80. And he said, when I get to the age I can't get them in the truck anymore, I'm gonna hang it up. But then we kept sheep on his property so he could still enjoy them. He could still go out and look at them every day. So that was kind of my giving back to him. All right. How hard is it to corral your sheep for hoof and shots and weighing? So that's a good question. And I don't want to get too much into the money aspect, and I don't want to badmouth anybody, so I'm not going to. What I will tell you is you don't have to buy expensive corralling equipment. You don't have to buy expensive stuff. And the reason I would tell you even not to is it just takes forever to recuperate your money. Boy, it is tough being in our spot. Boohoo for me. The weird spot that we get into as a YouTube person is that there's always someone that wants you to sponsor them. So there's always someone out there that's willing to give you free stuff if you're willing to try to sell it to other people. And we don't do that. And boy, sometimes I wish we did. But we have old hand-me-down chutes and gates and things like that they work just fine. I'd really like to have new stuff, but boy, I can't justify the cost. If I drop $11,000 on a handling system, I can't even tell you how long it would take for me to recuperate that money, and that stinks. There's some things that I did spend money on that I had to. The manure spreader. I think when I bought the manure spreader, it put me back probably $4,000. I don't know. Jocelyn, do you know how much the manure spreader costs? $4,000 or $5,000, she says. My wife can hear me in the next room. That's a lot, but we had to have it, right? You had to have something to do with the manure. With the handling systems, what we found is we can just set up, and we made a video about this. We actually set up corral panels and food. Best thing we do. You make a circle out of a couple panels and a couple T-posts. You put some food in there. They run in there. You close them up. And then you just go through and you grab them and you mark them. If you have help, it makes it easy. A handling system, it's fantastic if you have one. And they work really good. I just can't justify the cost. We do have a small handling system. We have a tilt table. We have a few other things. It was all stuff that I got from either bought third hand or I inherited, things like that. So you're just going to have to see what you can afford and what you absolutely need. Start off with the things that kidding have to have, and the rest of the stuff, just find a way to make it work. Catching them out on pasture, we've done great with just driving T-posts in the ground and setting up the corral panels, putting food in there. They come in, we close it up, and we do our work. After we're done, the thing I will tell you is get some kind of paint or some kind of marker to mark them when you're done, because you will not remember, especially when you're doing 50, 60, 70 plus animals. When we give them a shot, when we trim hooves or do whatever, we just place a mark on their rump, and then we know they're done. And then you can either kick them out of the containment area, or you can simply just work around them. But at least then you know who you've gotten. Now, we do fall shearing here on the farm. We do spring shearing and we do fall shearing for our sheep, and we do hoof trimming when we shear. That's just part of it. So that's normally enough, but the goats we obviously have to catch at other times. We have learned over the years, if you're dealing with hoof rot, we're getting back into quote unquote hoof rot season, where people that have really wet climates and things like that may start dealing with hoof rot. I have noticed that I think you almost have to give some kind of antibiotic. If you really, really want to stop hoof rot and you want to be successful at it, what I have found works for me is I'll bring the animal in. I will trim the hoof down. I'll make sure it's clean. I'll make sure there's nothing that's causing them cuts or anything like that. I'll use some kind of topical, either copper sulfate or zinc to get in there. Dr. Naylor's Hoof and Heel works really good. Copper sulfate packing works really good. And then we give them a series of 2 shots. The first shot is going to be an intramuscular shot of antibiotic. We use Nuflor. We find that Nuflor works best. You can use LA200. So we give an initial intramuscular injection of the antibiotic. It gets in their system quick. Remember, intramuscular is one of the faster ways you can get it in the system. And then we wait 1 day. 48 hours later, so on the second day, we follow that animal up with a subcutaneous shot of antibiotic. That, along with the topical hoof treatment, usually just knocks it out of the park and we're done. We have seen when we were in our learning curve years ago, we tried just doing topical treatments and it just doesn't work as good as the topical treatments in conjunction with the injectable antibiotic. So something to think about. But again, that was going off of, I guess I kind of segued off of hoof trimming there for you on that one. So Sean, hi Sean, from Canada. We have lots of people from Canada. We have lots of people from Australia and all over the world. It's so awesome to see you guys. The problem that I run into with my Canadian friends is it's really hard. We can't get you anything. It is ridiculously expensive for us to ship anything to you. And what you can get in Canada and what we can get here in the States are just never seem to jive with each other. You guys have cool stuff up there that we don't have, like Baycox, which is the totralazole. Up there you can get Baycox. Down here it's harder to get the totralazole. But anyways, do you get your hay tested? And what do you think is the most important part of the results? There's so many things that's important when it comes to hay. And you want to make sure that you get your hay tested in the condition that you're going to feed it. And so I would say that would be one of the more important things that you would want to get when you do your testing. So why would you test your hay? Well, you want to know what your protein percentage is. You also want to know what the nutrients are inside the hay, and that way you know what your animals are getting. You want to make sure that you don't want them to be deficient in certain things. And geographically located throughout the world, you can find deficiencies in all kinds of different things. Some areas of the world are super deficient in copper. Other parts of the world are super deficient in minerals like selenium, cobalt, things like that. So having a good handle on what it is that your hay is, is probably the best thing. The advice I would give you is if you can purchase your hay in large quantities, try to do so, and try to get each large batch tested, because you'll notice substantial differences between the batches. And if you're buying it now and later, that farmer may have harvested the hay that you got. It may be second cutting off of this field, and off of this field it may be third cutting. Other times hay dealers will broker, so you may be buying hay that didn't even come from their farm. So it's important. So you can't tell what it's going to be, even based on, we'll use protein as an example. You would look at a pasture, let's say that's full of really nice legumes like bird's foot trefoil and alfalfa and clover, and say, oh, well, it's going to be really high in protein and it should be about this percentage. The longer that hay sits, once they cut it and it starts to break down, all of these percentages start to go down. So the mineral content, the vitamin content, all of these things that are in that hay, as that hay sits and it ages and it breaks down, a lot of the sugars inside that convert into starches, and you get all these chemical changes that are happening. So my advice to you is check the hay that you are going to feed your animals. Don't just assume that because the last batch you got from them, so that can get expensive. Just find a good Find a good lab that'll test for you and go from there. Most animals, most of these ruminants don't need like pure alfalfa. They don't need pure legume fill in the blank. They do really, really well on a grass mix with legume. You can get a really nice grass alfalfa mix that works great. Grass clover mix that works great. Obviously, we want you to be careful and cautious when you're switching between. You always want to watch for bloat when you introduce something new. And again, we don't ever want them to go to a new hay hungry. And that can be hard sometimes. People struggle with this. Like they wait until they run out of hay to go buy more hay. And so you find people are in this situation where, the animals starve to death because, not to death, but they're hungry because they haven't eaten in like a day. And now you bring home a new hay they haven't had before and you throw it in there. And what's the first thing they're going to do? Well, they're going to go after it and they're going to start to eat it. And that's when we see issues with bloat primarily is the main concern. Cud spilling, things like that. Frothy bloat we'll see a lot with introducing clover that's been baled. That's been my personal experience, is that we get abomasum bloat when they're on pasture. We tend to get frothy bloat when they're eating hay. The difference is what it sounds like. In the abomasum bloat, their actual side's going to swell up, and it's a bloating inside the stomach area, inside the intestinal area, where you're going to actually see it on the side. Where the frothy bloat is actually, it'll be coming out of their mouth and out of their nose, and you'll see bubbles and foam and spit and nasty stuff coming out. Normally with the abomasum bloat, we would want to treat that with TheraBloat. I've told you guys before, but I'll tell you again, if you don't have TheraBloat, buy the little bottle of TheraBloat and just have it just in case of an emergency. It has chemicals in there that will eliminate bloat almost immediately. Normally with frothy bloat, it's a little bit more, it's easier to treat, but it's a little bit more science involved with surface tension and other things that we won't get into here. But you can normally drench an animal with some kind of an oil, even like a vegetable oil. You can orally drench them with it, and it will help get rid of the frothy bloat. You can also use the TheraBloat to get rid of the frothy bloat as well. And then, of course, we have our go-tos for prevention side, which would be you can buy bloat guard blocks, which come from a company called Sweet Licks. I know Sweet Licks has a bloat guard block. You can offer free choice sodium bicarb, things like that. But again, I think if you keep those animals full as often as possible, you offer them free choice sodium bicarb all the time, and you offer them clean, fresh water, and you pace yourself on those transitions, I think you're going to find that they respond a lot better, and you're going to see a lot less serious bloating and problems that are associated with that. All right. I see all these people that are like, oh yeah, I watch it work. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. How many ewes were you trying to get service with 2 rams? Did the rams know each other? Would you have done it differently? No. So timing and how many ewes a ram can handle really depends on how you're synchronizing your ewes. If you're going to give a cedar, and that would be a suppository, a progesterone suppository chased with an injection of HCG, to where you have 30, 40 ewes or 30, 40 does all going at the same time. I would say the most you could handle, if you wanted to make sure they're all landed, I would say if you start getting north of 30, you want to have 2 males in there. If you are getting over that, you probably want to have 2. If they're spread out to where they're just kind of going on their own, then you may be able to double that number. Having the males out there. I don't know how many we have out there, how many females off the top of my head. I'd have to look at the books, but it's quite a few. I would say we're probably up into maybe the 60s. And this is just on the pasture out front. No, all of our males that we have get along very well. They all live together even during the off season. So they're very well versed with one another. And it's very rare that we'll see This may be one of the first times actually we've had this would probably be one of the first times we've ever had an instance happen where they got really, really hurt. Um, I think we had one break a leg a while ago, but it's pretty rare. What's happening is it's just a perfect storm of you have an animal that gets hit just right. You have hormones involved because the ewes or the does are in estrus, and it's just kind of one of those situations. If you could do it over, yeah, I'd probably, in hindsight, I think if you want to do it the right way to do it is to take and just have them completely separated in different paddocks and just have just the amount of females with one male that's going to breed them until they're bred. Weird situation here. Our ewes are not in estrus right now. To give you full disclosure, what's happening right now that we weren't prepared for was some of our goats, our does are in estrus. And because our does are in estrus, our male sheep, our rams, are catching a whiff of that, and it's causing them to ramp up their aggression. And we just simply weren't. One of many things, it slips your mind. You're like, you think of everything, and then you don't. I kind of have to laugh, not at this situation. This situation isn't funny, but sometimes people call me and ask me, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, they'll ask me a question, I'm like, I don't know. Or I do something dumb, which I do often. It's no different than anything else. Like, you're busy, right? You got 50 million things going on and lots of animals, and something just slips your mind and you do something that you might not normally do. And then you think back on, and you're like, oh, I can't believe I did that. Like, it happens to everybody. I have to chuckle when I read YouTube comments, and they're like, because if I make a mistake, I'll tell you guys. And sometimes there's trolls, and they'll be like, oh, you shouldn't even be raising animals if you make that kind of mistake. It's like, whatever, we all make mistakes. We all do goofy stuff. You just hope it's not a big, huge mistake where something gets hurt or you get hurt. So good question. But yeah, the correct answer is you want to keep your females separated with just a male in there that will breed just that number. A lot of people can't do that. A lot of the free ranging people can't do that. And then you got to keep in mind, are they going to get triggered because of something else going on with a completely different species? So good question. What do you think about Katahdin sheep? Not familiar with this breed. I really like Katahdin sheep. We have one of our favorite ewes here on the farm is a Katahdin, Stella. She's fantastic. She's got great body conformation. She births well. She normally births 3-4 babies, and that's without any hormones or anything. I was pleasantly surprised. I see a wide variety of conformation between breeds. So that's something that you just want to watch for. And I say between breeds, I should say between the different breeds of Katahdin. So, you can go to one farm and they're like, oh, these are Katahdin. And then you go to another farm and it's like, these Katahdins don't look like those Katahdins. So, you can't ever get too hung up on a breed specifically. It's the same thing with boar goats or Kikos or, fill in the blank, pick a breed and a species. Like, it depends on where you go and who's you're looking at. And we see that with the Dorpers as well. I suspect that if I had to do it over based off of all of the different breeds that we have now, we probably have, I don't know how many breeds we have. I'm going to guess we have 20 different breeds here on the farm. I would have to say so far as just body conformation wise and feed conversion ratio, just on that alone, I'm most impressed by the Dorpers. As far as like handleability, Dorpers, no, they are just, our Dorpers are wild. The females are very aggressive and they're harder to handle. But feed conversion ratio and just overall, I haven't lambed them out yet, so stay tuned. But overall, the Katahdin, I think she's just kind of an overall good fit. She doesn't have to be shorn. She's really, really healthy. I don't know if we've ever wormed her, to be honest with you. I don't know if we've ever wormed her. She's always just red and looks great. So yeah, I think there's a lot worse breeds you could start off with. That's for sure. If you're open to the idea of wool breeds, I think that Pulled Dorset is a really, really good breed to start off with. So I feel comfortable telling you that right now. For somebody new getting into sheep, I would say if you don't mind the wool, Pulled Dorset is a great breed, and Katahdins are a great breed. I can't give you enough of advice on the Dorpers yet, because I haven't got that far with them yet. All right, good question. The tilt table will be awesome for hoof trimming. Save the old back. Yeah, Brian was talking to me earlier about my. I did a video where I was trimming goat hooves, and he was like, "Man, it makes my back hurt just to look at that." And a tilt table does come in handy for that. Our tilt table is very old. I'll have to show you guys a video of the tilt table. I usually don't do too many videos on equipment that you don't have. Because then we like to think of ourselves as an educational channel. So maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way. I don't know. I'm hesitant to make a video about expensive equipment that other people don't have, because then you're watching it and you're like, yeah, that's nice. But then you don't have it. And so I don't know how much you can take away from the video. But I'll at least do a quick blurb about our tilt table so you can see the old style one. I bet you our tilt table is 1950s, maybe 1960s. So I'll show you that and you can kind of see what it looks like. But yeah, they are handy. So yes. We had another question before I get too far that I wanted to talk about. Two things have happened this week. Three things. One was very funny. For me to look at, not for the individual happened to. His goat ran into a culvert. Oh my goodness, that is such a goat. Boy, you got to watch goats. If you've got a hole in the fence, if you've got a place they can get stuck, they will get stuck. And it made me think about collars. I want you guys to be really, really cautious with collars. I know a lot of people like to put collars on their animals. If you put a collar on your animal, I'm not saying that you can't. If you put a collar on your animal, please, please, please put a breakaway collar on them, because a goat will hang itself. It will find a way, it will get caught on something, and it will hang itself. The other thing, if you have large, tall tubs, single hole hog waterers, things like that you're giving water to your sheep and goats with, when you start kidding, if you have those single hole hog or double hole hog waterers in there, or the tall troughs, you have to cover the top of them, because baby goats will jump on top of things before they can actually see what they're jumping onto. And they will, just trust me on this one, they will literally jump in and drown inside of a watering, a big trough. When they're babies, as soon as they start jumping, you'll go out there, and we've had it happen. And we've had babies, they jumped into it and drowned. It is a dumb way to lose an animal. So, when you're thinking goats, always think ahead. Just think like it's like having a toddler in the house, right? Like, if it's quiet for too long, you're like, I wonder what they're doing. Same thing with these goats. They will find ways to get into trouble. So the second thing that's happened this week is we had an individual that has a goat that can't worm it. Like, literally, we've thrown everything we can think of at this goat. I've worked with her. The veterinarians have worked with her. We have thrown everything at this animal, and nothing seems to be worming it. And you will run into this from time to time. So here's the big takeaway that I want you to think of with this animal, and it can be happening on your farm as well. And this is why it's important for you to do fecals, is that otherwise, to look at this animal, he's eating well, he seems healthy, he's got red eyelids, but when you do the fecals on him, you're seeing that he's shedding all of the stuff. And a lot of that's probably genetic. But it's important for you to understand that, we say, and it is true, it's true within reason, that, about well, this is true in your workplace. Think of your coworkers, right? 10% of the people are 90% of your problems. And when it comes to your farm, 10% of your animals, when it comes to worm burden and coccidia, are going to be 90% of your problem. 10% of those animals are going to shed 90% of the coccidia and 90% of the worms on your farm. And it's a matter of finding which ones they are. And, we get really hung up on thinking that, these animals are always going to present themselves as being pale and sickly and having scours and stuff like that. Oh, no. You can have animals on your farm that have uh, a type of resistance that allows them to carry this burden of coccidia or worms, and everywhere they go, they're just dumping this all over your farm. So that's where the fecal samples come in handy, and that's why it is beneficial, is because if you have these typhoid Marys on your farm that are spilling this and infecting the other animals, it's important to know which ones they are. And unfortunately, you may have to move them on down the road. You'll just have to see how you can handle them and how they fit into your farm. The last thing that I had happen this week was we had an individual that said, when I worm my animals get bottle jaw. So, we look at the eyelids, and this happens often. We will look at the eyelid looks pale. They don't have bottle jaw. We worm them, and then they get bottle jaw. So we have a video where we talk about this, but it warrants repeating. Bottle jaw is a symptom of low plasma protein within the vasculature and within the blood cells. So, normally inside of our veins and our arteries, we have red blood cells that carry hemoglobin and things like that. They're proteins essentially. And there's this thing called osmosis, and we're not going to get into it too much, but those proteins in the arteries and the veins help keep fluid attracted to them. And when you start losing those red blood cells, that fluid starts to escape and it starts to manifest itself in what we call third spacing. In the case of the animals, they get it down here underneath their chin. In humans, we see it more manifest itself in like the legs. We will see some moon-shaped facing, but sometimes people's legs will swell and you'll have other issues. But essentially, it's because of not enough protein, not enough red blood cells and things like that inside the vasculature, inside the veins. So what happens? Well, you worm that animal, you give it a strong wormer. All of those parasites that are attached to the wall of the stomach or intestine or wherever they are, they all release at once. And you're left with these little microscopic wounds. And those parasites also release certain chemicals that cause blood thinning. And so you've got a wound that takes a little bit to heal. Now, is the animal going to bleed to death? No, I'm not saying that the animal is going to bleed to death. But what I'm telling you is the animal is going to bleed enough that little bit of red blood cells that they had left in there are going to get a little bit more depleted. And you're going to see them third space. You're going to see them get that bottle jaw, and over time it'll correct itself. So often what we'll see in animals with heavy worm loads, and this is normal, is that they may be a little pale. If you've got a heavy worm load, you worm them, then the next day you see bottle jaw, and then you start treating them with things like iron, vitamin B, fill in the blank, more hydration, things like that, and the bottle jaw kind of resolves itself. Because you're temporarily making things a little bit better. The vasculature is getting a little bit better. You're getting a little bit more maybe protein buildup in that plasma, things like that. And then you worm them again, or that stuff you gave them starts to wear off, and that bottle jaw will come back. And you kind of get this yo-yo effect with that bottle jaw. And then eventually it will resolve itself and it will go away. But again, very, very normal for you to see bottle jaw post-weaning, or post-worming. The other thing is it takes time for that pallor, that whiteness in the eyelid to correct itself. That's very, very normal. That redness is going to come back as that animal's body makes more red blood cells. So don't expect to worm your animal and go out there the next day and all of a sudden they're pink. No. It's going to take time. So don't be too discouraged. Don't be too discouraged if you get bottle jaw. Don't be too discouraged if you don't see the color come right back immediately in the eyelid. These things take time, and that is very normal. Okay. Kindig, Don't forget to like. Yes, we appreciate that. Don't forget to like. Helps us out. Okay. I drove T-post today. I think it's time to get a motorized T-post machine. They have air-driven T-post drivers and um, uh, so air-powered ones and gasoline-powered ones. We have a gasoline-powered T-post driver here on the farm, actually. So your sheep for winter. So sheep for winter, we shear our animals, and this blows people's mind, right? So we're getting ready to shear here towards the end of October, and people say, "Why in the world would you shear your sheep when it's getting close to wintertime?" Well, good question. So we have adequate shelter that they can get into, so that helps. The other thing is that wool holds moisture. And so what'll end up happening is the sheep will go out, they'll get snowed on, they'll get rained on, and they will come into the barn and they will carry all of that moisture in the barn with them in their wool, and it'll cause condensation and other problems inside the barn, and it sets the animals up for upper respiratory infections like pneumonia. The other thing about shearing, one of many other things about shearing, is it prevents them from being outside when it's too cold and dropping their lambs out in snowbanks. And probably the third important thing is having less wool on that. Well, I guess there's four. The third one is it's cleaner when they're lambing and having these babies. The babies can get to the teats a little bit easier. It's not covered up with wool. And the fourth thing is, what was the fourth thing? Oh, brown fat build up on the lamb's bodies. Scientific evidence shows that if the ewes have been shorn and they have less of an ability to hold in body heat, the babies will actually come out with more brown fat on their body, substantially more brown fat on their body, and it lends to lots and lots of other benefits. That brown fat is really, really good for the body, for the metabolism, for other things as far as holding on to nutrition and overall health and thriftiness. We start getting into the deep weeds of like glucose and glucogenesis and things like that. But just know that that brown fat is good for them. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if my animals were going to be out on pasture all winter long in snowstorms and things like that. But for us in the winter, we shear in October and they do great. They do better. And once we've talked other farms into doing this, and they've tried it, they're much happier. If you don't want to shear your sheep before winter time, I completely understand. We at least want you to do what's called crutching. And that is where you go through and you actually remove the wool from the back end of the ewe and on the sides, so the babies, the lambs can get at the teat structure better. And so the back end's a little bit cleaner once they have their babies. All right, let's see what we've got here. I have 7 sheep on 1 acre and battling worm load because of new additions from sale barns. Yeah. How do you recommend going forward without knowing what dewormers were used previously? That's a tough one. So you're almost going to have to do fecal. You're almost going to have to do fecal samples to see what kind of worms the animals have. This is where buying a microscope may be most cost, have the most cost advantage to you. You can buy a microscope for between $100 and $200. So in that case, what would I do? I would fecal sample everyone, and I would see what the prevalent worm is on your farm. And then I would start off with what we call our trifecta method, which would be I would worm. And hear me out here. Don't get too mad at me. I would worm every single one of them with white wormer with valbazen. I would, as long as they're not pregnant, I would worm every one of them with valbazen. I would wait 1 week. I would worm every one of them with injectable Dectomax. And I would wait 1 week and I would worm every single one of them with copper sulfate, assuming that they're all adults. I would just hit them boom, boom, boom. And then I would go through and I would check all my fecals again, and I would see where I was at, and I would go from there. If you're worried about worming resistance, then I would hit them all with the white wormer. At 1 week, I would run fecals on them all again, check to see where everybody was at. And then I would worm them with the Dectomax, do fecals again, and then worm them with copper sulfate and do fecals again. They're all going to respond to the copper sulfate. The issue is they're not all going to respond. All species of parasites are not going to respond to the copper sulfate. That's going to be more your gastrointestinal worms that would respond to your clear wormers. So it's like tapeworms won't respond to copper sulfate. And then go from there. The beauty of the copper sulfate is that we don't have to worry about the resistance, and it's a good, once you get on it, you can just kind of coast and you can maintain your flock on that copper sulfate. I guess, the bad thing is you don't know what you've got and you don't know what they're resistant to. So you're kind of in a bad spot, but fecal samples is really your best option. And without having that knowledge of what you have and knowing how they responded to the wormers, it's difficult to know. But because these animals have brought some new stuff in, I would say go through once and worm everybody and be done with it. Now, we're not telling people ask me, they're like, well, how often do you worm? Well, I worm every 2 months. And they say, well, and they assume that I mean I'm worming every animal every 2 months. No. I'm only worming who needs it, is what I'm saying. And honestly, if I get an animal that I have to worm them every 2 months, they have to leave, because here's the thing. There is no cure. There is no magical wormer. There is no magical coccidiosis medication that's going to just eradicate all these things and you're not going to have to worry about it. Every individual animal has its own resistance system in place. So you can have something like copper sulfate wormer, which works really, really well. You can have a ewe or a doe, and you can hit them with copper sulfate wormer and they will drop their worm load, and you can go back in 2 or 3 weeks and they'll already have worms again. Like that animal has no immunity to worms whatsoever. And so a lot of times people think it's a wormer problem, but it's really an animal problem. And that's what those fecals are going to tell you. If you worm that animal and they dump their worm load and you do a check on them and they're clean, and then a month later they're full of worms again, it's not the wormer, it's the animal. That animal has no resistance. And that's where people really get into bad spots with some of these YouTube sensations and other online people that are like, I have a worm resistant flock. No, you have a flock that is resistant to the parasites that you personally have on your farm at your location. You can buy livestock, be it sheep or goats or cows or hogs or anything, from these farms that say, oh, well, our animals are worm resistant. They may be worm resistant there, and then you bring them home, and this happens a lot. We get phone calls a lot from people that are like, I bought animals from XYZ farm and they said they were worm resistant, and I brought them home and now they're dying. And I say, yeah, they were fine where they were, but now you've brought them to a new location. You have new strains of parasites. You have things that they're not used to. You're having animals and ground and environmental concern, everything's changed. And what you found worked for an animal on one location may not work for that animal on another. So you always have to be really cautious. But fecals will tell the story. And again, you need to determine, is it a worming resistant issue or is it an animal issue to where they personally don't have any resistance? And this can be the same for coccidia. This can be the same for worms. When it comes to coccidia, you can give an animal totralazole, which works fantastic. You can go on our website, you can go to Foundation Feed, you can buy totralazole right there, and you can give it to them, and I guarantee you that it's going to wipe out any coccidia that they have in them. I can't guarantee you that they're not going to get it right back, because if that animal has no resistance whatsoever for whatever reason, we can treat it with the medication. Think of it this way. I work in healthcare. If I have a patient that's immunocompromised for some reason, let's say that they have some kind of a disease or a virus that makes them immunocompromised. Let's say that they've had chemotherapy that makes them immunocompromised. I have to be really, really careful what kind of bugs what kind of bacteria and viruses and things that patient comes in contact with. That's why you see a lot of them walking around with masks on, and are not out around family and friends, is because they personally don't have any resistance to some of these bugs. And so even though I could treat this patient with antibiotics over and over and over, they're just going to keep getting sick and sick and sick and sick until we fix their um, personal problem that they're having with their immunity. So hopefully that makes sense. But that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. Thank you very much. All right. I somehow just like jump forward on some things. So let's see. Oh, it's our friends from Fuzzy Butt Farm. Hello. Nice to see you here again. Thanks. 4 months ago, when I found your channel, Tim, I started giving free choice minerals, baking soda, Epsom salt, and multi-minerals for goats. Haven't had any problems with mineral deficiencies. That's great. Again, and we've talked about this, and I'm glad you brought that up, because first of all, thank you for saying that. That means a lot, and it's nice to know that we've been able to help you out. Just because you're running an animal on a grain-free operation does not mean that that's a reasonable excuse for you not to give them the nutrition that they need. Free choice minerals can go a very long way. Sodium bicarb, all these things can go a very long way. You can run a organic operation and still give free choice minerals and still have really, really good outcomes. And lots of people do. So thank you for bringing that up. We really appreciate it. Let's see what we got. Any updates on the spotter and lantern flies? Are they dangerous? No idea. I could not find any. So here's the problem that I always run into when I'm looking up information for you guys, is that unless I can find it from someone, no kidding, like I know it's legit, it's coming from a university, or it's coming from a veterinarian that's done some kind of study or something like that, I can't post it, because then I'm just part of the problem. And it's scary out there, folks. I get emails from people every week that are like, hey, I read this, check this out, and they'll send it to me, and I'll read it, and it's like, people have no problem saying that they're veterinarians when they're not. People have no problem saying that, this is, just because someone has a lot of followers, or just because someone has a really cool title and, for their website, like Sheep 101, or I'm just using it as an example. I'm not picking on anyone specifically. It doesn't mean that the information that they have on there should be taken as gospel. And the other thing, and we've been over this a million times, is that, I give you information and someone else gives you information, and some of it's going to work for you and some of it isn't. And, you just do your best to process it, try it, see what works for you and see what doesn't. And that's the best that you can do. But you do have to be cautious, because boy, oh boy, people people have no problem like giving really, really bad advice. But no, I haven't found any information. I will keep looking. And if I find anything more, I will update you. Okay. Next question. Would you keep intact female livestock guardian dog away from rams as well? I haven't. That's a great question. I don't know. We have intact female livestock guardian dogs. I have not noticed any issues with her when she goes into estrus. I have not noticed any response from our males. So I don't know. That's a great question. I need to ponder that. There's anecdotal evidence to support that even human females that are on their period can elicit an aggressive response from a male ram or buck. And that is well known throughout the industry. So I would suspect surely the female livestock guardian dog may elicit an aggression response as well. I'll have to look that up. See, good thing you guys are here. You give me new things to lose sleep at night over. I love my Dorpers, although I guess that's because I found them to be smarter. Yeah, uh, it depends on what you want in an animal and what works for you. Um, we some breeds of sheep we found that are very like aloof. I'll use sheep as an example. Some of the breeds of sheep, and I guess it's true for the goats too. If the mom seems to be really like aloof and kind of friendly and just kind of chill, like everything, she's like, it's all good. They don't make the best moms. It doesn't seem like the best moms that we've had historically is my wife's in the other room and she's listening to me, and I bet you I know a couple names that are running through her head right now. Vanessa is one of them. We had a sheep named Vanessa. Can you think of any others, Josh, that are crazy moms? Vanessa was one of them. I'm trying to think of a few other ones. We've had a few that are just like they were nuts, but boy, they did really good with their babies. They were like the best moms ever. You wouldn't want to get anywhere near them. But then our other moms that are like super easy to get along with and super cool. They have their babies and they're just like meh, the baby's off in the corner screaming its head off, and the mom's like meh, and someone new comes up and tries to grab the baby, and they're like meh, and so you've got this trade off, right? And it's like, okay, what situation does this work best in? Maybe if you're on pasture and you've got predators and you've got a bunch of moms together, maybe you want that mom that's going to like be a little bit more like helicopter mom. But if you're in a confined area where you want everybody to be calm, right? That may be, so it's going to depend on you and it's going to depend on your setup. And so you just have to see what works for you. Good point. All right. What is the break-even point between buying your hay versus investing in equipment? Well, Dave, if you find that out, let us know, because there are so many variables. I could probably get my doctorate in economics by figuring out the answer to that question. The quality of your ground, the price of diesel fuel, financing rates, how good is your credit? How easy can you find equipment? What works for you? What doesn't? What kind of a storage situation do you have? Can you make small squares? And if you do make small squares, how are you going to handle them? How are you going to stack them? How are you going to store them? If you make rounds, how are you going to feed them? How are you going to control waste? And then how much are they charging to bale in your area? I have a guy that bales for me. He's very, very reasonable. But if something ever happens to him, I don't know what I'm going to do. I will tell you that I've crunched the numbers, and between all the farms that we have and all the farms that we lease, I've crunched the numbers as to like, if I got my own, what would it, and it doesn't work out. I would have to start bailing for other people and try to get some extra income in between. All of my jobs that I have, I can't make it work. I'm better off. What I have found works for me is I own or lease the land and I hire someone to come on and bale for me. It is cheaper to hire someone to bale for me on land that I own or lease than it is for me just to go, pay for the bales at another location. But it's not enough to justify me buying my own equipment and doing it myself. So hopefully that answers your question. But if you figure out a new bit of information on that, let me know. I would appreciate it. All right. I've been dealing with bottle jaw for a week now. And yeah, like we talked about, Brian, it looks like it's going away, it comes back. Looks like it's going away, it comes back. And what I think you'll find is as that animal recuperates, what I think you'll find is it'll slowly go away and it won't come back. But that is very common for you to get that yo-yo effect with the bottle jaw. And so when treating for worms bottle jaw, should you just treat the animal for anemia? Yeah, anytime if you're seeing bottle jaw, that's because of osmosis, and we talked about that, about the third spacing. If you have bottle jaw, that you're dealing with a decreased amount of protein in the vasculature, and so that is more than likely due to a decrease in overall red blood cells. And so then you need to make sure that you're offering good nutrition, good clean water, all of your vitamins and minerals. You can consider injectable iron. That may be an option for you. You basically want to give that animal what it needs in order to help manufacture its own new red blood cells. And that's kind of a long list of things, but generally I think good overall nutrition. So what do I do if I have an animal that's anemic? I I do treat the animal with injectable vitamin B. I do treat the animal with injectable iron. I do add some molasses to their water for 2 points. One, the molasses is good. It's got some vitamins and nutrients. Molasses is kind of overrated, but it does work. The other thing is it gets them drinking more water. I like blue light. Blue light works really good for water addition as well. It's like Gatorade for sheep and goats. And I give them a little bit more grain. I give them some more hay. I put them in an area where they're not having to compete with 50 million other animals, and they can get some extra nutrition. And I give them some time. I think that's the best. I think that's the best thing that you can do. I have a young ram that's been battling, bottle jaw, and I've done white wormer and clear wormer. Haven't tried vitamin B complex yet. He still eats well and looks good. Yeah, I think you need some time. Hey Tim, how do you recommend using copper sulfate? Have you made a video on it? Yeah. So we've got videos on that. Just do a search for. We show you how to make the copper sulfate, and we show you how to mix it. We show you how to administer it. Essentially, it's going to be a and this is based off what the universities have done in the university study. So it's going to be a 1% copper sulfate mixture. And it's going to be drenched at a rate of about 100 milliliters per head. It is very important that you mix it properly. It is very important that you administer it properly. If you start to fiddle with these numbers, you run into all kinds of problems, and you're going to have dead animals, and you're going to be mad at me. Just don't do it. Just do it as directed. If you go on our videos, you do a simple search for copper sulfate, do Linessa Farms copper sulfate, it'll come up, and you'll see all of our videos. And in almost every one of those videos, there's going to be a link down at the bottom. There are multiple studies, but the one that we really like is the University of Kentucky study. And if you guys are watching, you haven't done that yet, if you haven't looked at the University of Kentucky study, please do. The other thing that's really interesting is if you go to, I think it's like, once you get down into the 70th, 80th page or whatever, you see the studies that they did testing for copper toxicity. So it wasn't only that they did this, they also tested the animals to see, okay, if I give a sheep this 1% copper sulfate oral drench, how much of that's actually going to get into their system? What's the chances they're going to get sick? And they showed that the blood work showed nothing between a sheep that got it and a sheep that didn't. And so we've worked with a lot of veterinarians through a lot of you. You've put me in touch with your vets, or I've talked to your vets, and I've been like, hey, here's the studies, here's the info. And I email it to them, or they read it. And then, it's much easier for them to handle, because now they've got no kidding scientific evidence. The other thing that I tell people is we've been doing copper sulfate worming for 4 years here. We have friends that have been doing it even longer. Never have I ever had any issues with it for sheep or goats. But again, it's very important. You have to mix it correctly. You have to give it correctly. You can't fiddle with it. Some people are like, I can't give 100 milliliter oral drench. Well, then you need to find something else to do, because you can't double the concentrate and give 50. You can't quadruple the concentrate. You can't put your stink on it. Everybody wants to put, I love using that term. I always say it, and it's probably off-putting to some people. That's okay. I always say, people always want to put their stink on things, right? Like, you'll tell somebody, like, you can give, and there's just people that are like this, right? Like, you can give them a recipe. They'll eat something, they're like, this is delicious. What's the recipe? And you give it to them, and then they'll bring it to you, and they're like, I made your recipe. And you taste it, and you're like, this is awful. And they're like, well, I did this, and I did this, and I did this. This isn't one of those things you want to do that with. If you can't follow the directions with this copper sulfate wormer, it's not for you, because you will hurt your animals, and it's not worth it. So, all right. Oh, no problem, Brian. Brian was just apologizing for asking a question, and no worries. All right. I would give the vitamin B regardless. Anytime my animals are anemic or having problems, I give them vitamin B. Is there a way to build up resistance to worms and parasites so that they don't go down so often? That's a great question. So the best way to have your animals build up a resistance is to have them exposed to it. You want to keep your animals that have good resistance, get rid of your animals that have bad resistance, and keep your animals on your property for as long of a period of time as you can handle. A lot of these farms that have worm resistant animals on their property have done just that. They run fecals. They see who has it. The old school way, if you can afford it, which I don't recommend to anybody, is you just get 40 animals, you bring them in, you never worm any of them. And I know a very famous YouTuber that's like very off the cuff about it. They're like, oh, we bring in 40 animals, and if 20 of them die, then 20 of them die. And that's a unique way of looking at things. It's not a very cost effective way to do things. It's probably not the best animal husbandry practice in the world, but it will get things done. If you bring in 40 animals and you just cut them loose, and if they die, they die, eventually over a number of years, you will find out who has resistance and who doesn't. It doesn't have to be quite that bad. You can bring your animals in, you can worm those that need to be wormed, you can check fecals, and you're going to notice, if you're keeping those medical records, you'll notice you'll have some problem children. If you have some problem children, you get rid of them. If you get your bad eggs that you worm them and they can't handle it, and they get them right back, just get rid of them. Don't breed them. Don't keep them around. Some of my friends say don't name them, and they still name their animals. But what they're saying is essentially don't get so attached to that animal that it's a problem and you can't get rid of it. So good question. We have some Tinder spam here. I got to get rid of that. And let's see. Okay. Is this done before treating with worms? I guess I don't know the question that you're asking there to answer that. So I apologize. All right. Do you shear your own sheep? And if so, do you recommend a particular shear? I have tried 2, and I am struggling to even get it to cut. Given I have never sheared a sheep, and I know most of it is me. It might be you. It might not be you. So Premier One sells a sheep shearing machine that works really good. Years ago, Premier's and this is why I'm glad we don't take sponsorship from some people. I love Premier. I send a lot of people to Premier to get stuff. There's some stuff from Premier that has just gone downhill awful. And the main thing is their combs and cutters. Their combs and cutters now, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to say they're garbage, but they're just not good at all. I don't know what they've done. I can tell that they've switched their manufacturer because I can tell the hardness of the metal is not the same. I've had combs breaking on me. So you have a comb side of the shear and you have the cutter side. Heininger's probably one of the best. Oster's good. We have a professional, so we do both. I have a professional shearer that comes to my farm twice a year and he shears for me. I also have, which would be Yankee Clipper Shearing out of Vermont. If you need his number, he travels from Vermont all the way to the Mississippi, and then he goes back again. So if you guys are anywhere between Vermont and the Mississippi River from the east, he does not go west of the Mississippi. If you need a shearer, feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in touch with Colin Sigmund, who is from Yankee Clipper Shearing. Colin is a professional shearer, and he can shear one sheep about every 2 minutes average. Maybe if he's kind of relaxing and taking his time, it'll take him 2.5 to 3 minutes. But he's very, very fast. And so he shears for me twice a year, usually April and October. And then I do my own shearing. I use a hand unit that's from Premier, and then I use Heininger combs and cutters. And I find that that's what works well for me. For years and years, I used Premier combs and cutters, and they're awful. And we've been seeing lots and lots of people that are getting them out of the box from Premier, and they are so dull and so messed up that they won't cut anything. We do have a video showing how to set up your shears. If you have any questions on that, send me a message and I can work with you. But don't necessarily go right off the bat thinking that it's you. You may have a dull set of combs and cutters right out the box. But that's what I would advise. I think Premier's hand shearing, or that is to say the electric hand unit, I refer to it as a hand unit because there are professional shears that run off like a screwdriver or a worm drive. But I think an electric handheld unit would work well for you with good, reputable blades, and we can put you in touch with people to sharpen for you as well. So that is that. I am very glad that all of you joined us again today. Seems like every week we get more and more. If you're in Columbus, then yeah, send me an email. Send us an email at customer service. I'll type it down here. Send me an email at customer service at linessafarms.com. And if you guys live in the area to us, we're in Northwest Indiana. We're about halfway between Indianapolis and Chicago, near Interstate 65 in Rensselaer, Indiana. We open our doors to other farms for shearing. So if you come to Linessa Farms on one of our shearing days, we literally have trailers lined up down we have a 1/4 mile long driveway. We have it lined up with trailers because we normally charge between $7 and $8 a head to shear, and that includes a hoof trim. So you can understand why we have people. And for our friends that only have maybe 3, 4, 5 animals, it works out for them. So 44 Warlord, you are more than welcome to put your animals on a trailer and bring them up to Linessa Farms and have them shorn here. Or we can put you in touch with Colin Sigmund from Yankee Clippers, and we can probably work out something with you to get them down in your direction. So send me an email and we'll go from there. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with all of you. We do have Aaron Jennings is coming back to talk to us again. We have a boar goat guy that we are going to talk with. We have lots of cool stuff coming up, so I'm really excited. I really, really appreciate all of you supporting our channel and helping us out. You make this enjoyable for me, and I really, really appreciate it. So have a great night and have a great rest of your week, and I will see all of you again real soon. So you know the deal. I am Tim from Linessa Farms, specialty in heirloom livestock. Thanks for joining us again, and I look forward to seeing all of you again next time.